They sent an ultimatum to a mirror. Admiral Aris Thorne stood on the command deck of the Vigilance, his reflection a ghost in the tactical display. Before him, the Viridian system hung in stark relief, a single defiant convoy of civilian transports huddled behind the thin screen of his fleet. Across the void, the monolithic warships of the Krathan hegemony formed an impenetrable line, their ultimatum hanging in the silence: surrender the convoy's designated dissidents, or face total annihilation. The timer in the corner of the main holotank pulsed a calm, lethal red 3 hours 47 minutes. His fleet mind Lyra manifested as a calm shimmer of light. Beside the command throne, her synthesized voice a low counterpoint to the thrum of the ship's life support. Their demand is strategically incoherent, Admiral. The asset value of the convoy is negligible. Their insistence is doctrinal. Aris nodded, his knuckles white where he gripped the throne's armrest. The Krathan understood only one language: overwhelming force followed by absolute submission. They demanded a broken will. They're making an example, Aris said, his voice quiet, but carrying across the hushed bridge. They want the galaxy to see that dissent has a price payable in lives. His XO commander, Eva Rostova, stepped forward, her expression a mask of professional steel. All ships report ready, sir. Our mirror lattice is prepped for deployment on your command, but their blockade is tight. A straight run is suicide. The faint scent of ozone from the overworked console next to her station filled the air. The Krathan doctrine was a cancer, a belief that any challenge, no matter how small, must be crushed with disproportionate power to maintain order. Humanity and the alliance they led operated on a different principle. They taught first fought only when forced, and always offered a way out that wasn't a grave. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. It was time to open the books. Lyra, run the latest intercept profiles on their outer pickets, Aris ordered. I want to know the refresh rate of their sensor sweeps down to the microsecond. The light of the fleet mind pulsed brighter. Already done, Admiral. Their patterns are rigid, confident. They do not anticipate a challenge, only compliance or destruction. The console beside Aris chimed softly, a reminder of the immense energy being held in check within the ship's core. A vibration felt deep in the deck plates. A small vignette appeared on a secondary screen, a live feed from the lead transport, the Stardust Drifter. A young girl was holding a small, crudely carved wooden bird up to the viewport, showing it the distant, menacing shapes of the Krathan fleet. Her mother knelt beside her, whispering reassurances that Aris couldn't hear, but could feel in the quiet strength of her posture. The stakes were not abstractions. They had names and faces. The convoy was a promise, not a bargaining chip. They believe their ultimatum is a weapon of psychic terror, Aris mused, his gaze fixed on the enemy formation. They expect us to break ourselves against their certainty. Rostova shifted her weight. They're not wrong, Admiral. Direct confrontation would cost us half the fleet, even with the lattice. The cold calculus was undeniable, a stark reality that made the warmth of the bridge feel like a lie. Then we will not offer them a direct confrontation, Aris said, a plan beginning to coalesce. We will offer them a reflection of their own arrogance. He turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Jian Li. Jian, what is the maximum effective range of our decoy drones when slaved to Lyra's EW suite? Jian's fingers flew across his console. With Lyra running interference, we can make them look like capital ships from 10,000 kilometers out. Their heat signatures will be identical. The deception would be perfect. Aris allowed himself a grim smile. Excellent. Prepare to deploy the decoys in a standard breakout formation. Target the weakest point in their sensor grid, the sector with the longest sweep delay. He looked back at Lyra's shimmering form. And Lyra, I want you to project a ghost fleet. Not just ships, but the entire command and control chatter of a full carrier group. Make them believe the Seventh Fleet just dropped out of hyperspace on their flank. Their certainty was about to become their shackles. The Krathen were predictable, their doctrine a cage of their own making. They would react to a perceived threat with overwhelming reflexive aggression. They would turn to face the Ghost Fleet, tightening their formation, pulling resources from the blockade line to meet the imaginary threat. And in that moment, that brief window of doctrinal blindness, the real breakout would begin. Commander Rostova Aris said, his voice now ringing with command. "Get the convoy moving. Minimal power radiation silent. They will hug the shadow of our decoy launch." The deck vibrated as the ship's orientation thrusters fired a subtle shift in the eternal dance of orbital mechanics. The countdown timer ticked down 3 hours, 21 minutes. A low hiss of coolant vapor vented near the ceiling, a reminder of the immense energies being held in check. The board was set. The Krathen expected a fleet cowering before their might, paralyzed by an impossible choice. They would not see the quiet shuffle of pieces in the dark, the careful preparation for a move they had not even conceived of. Aris watched the civilian transport feed again, the little girl now asleep in her mother's arms, the wooden bird clutched in her hand. For them, he would turn the Krathen's strength into their most profound weakness. Lyra's voice was a whisper of pure data. "Decoys are away, Admiral. Ghost Fleet protocol initiated. I am projecting a full spectrum of false sensor returns from gravimetric distortions to neutrino emissions." On the main display, a swarm of brilliant new contacts blossomed on the far side of the Krathen fleet. The enemy ships, just as predicted, began to react. Their rigid line wavered, then broke as ships turned to face the Phantom Armada. A wedge of light pierced their armor of pride. "There's our window," Rostova confirmed, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "It's small, but it's there." The Krathen had taken the bait completely, their command channels flooding with panicked chatter that Lyra happily intercepted and displayed as translated text on a sidebar. Their rigid doctrine demanded they meet any capital-class threat with their full attention, leaving the insignificant convoy momentarily screened by their own repositioning. "Execute," Aris commanded. "Full power to the mirror lattice. Let's give the convoy a corridor of ghosts to run through." The Vigilance and her sister ships hummed as massive paper-thin crystalline structures unfolded from their spines. These were not weapons, but tools of misdirection. They caught the Krathen's sensor pings and threw them back, folded and warped, creating a dazzling hall of mirrors in the void. The ledger of light would balance the account. The civilian ships surged forward, their engines flaring to life as they entered the corridor of reflected sensor ghosts. To the Krathen, it would look like a sensor cascade failure, a storm of phantom readings and impossible returns. The convoy, tucked neatly inside the chaos, was effectively invisible. A slight jolt ran through the deck, the recoil from the lattice's energetic alignment. The air tasted of sterilized, recycled oxygen. "Convoy is through the primary blockade line," Gian reported, his knuckles white on his console's edge. "But the Krathen are starting to realize something's wrong. Their outer pickets are turning back." The window was closing. The enemy's rigid doctrine could be fooled, but not indefinitely. Their commanders were brutal, not stupid. Their arrogance had a limit. "Stay the course," Aris ordered, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. "Lyra, begin Phase 2. Start collapsing the Ghost Fleet, but make it look like they're being destroyed. I want simulated warp core breaches, distress calls the works. Sell the fantasy." He needed the Krathen to believe they had just won a glorious, if confusing, victory against a phantom foe. Their pride had to be sated. Lyra's light pulsed in acknowledgement. "Initiating glorious victory protocol, Admiral. I am simulating the destruction of 3 phantom battlecruisers and a carrier. The performance should be quite convincing. On the display, several of the Ghost Fleet icons flared violently, before vanishing, accompanied by simulated energy blooms that would read as catastrophic explosions on the Krathen sensors. The lie must be paid for with the coin of their own expectations. The Krathen fleet slowed its pursuit, their attention divided between the retreating convoy and the apparent implosion of the Phantom fleet. Their comms channels, still monitored by Lyra, shifted from panic to triumphant confusion. They had faced a fleet, and that fleet had shattered against their might. It was the only narrative their doctrine allowed them to accept. The console glare reflected in Rostova's eyes as she watched the enemy vectors change. "It's working, Admiral," she breathed. "They're hesitating. The convoy is approaching the system's jump point." A successful breakout was now within reach, but Aris knew it wasn't enough. The Krathen had still issued the ultimatum, had still threatened to butcher civilians to make a point. Allowing them to walk away with a confusing but satisfying victory was not justice. It was merely a postponement of the next atrocity. "We do not just survive, we teach." Gian Aris said, his voice hard as diamond. "Target the Krathen flagship, not with weapons. I want a single focused data stream. Encrypt it with their highest command-level cipher." Gian's brow furrowed. "Sir? What data are we sending?" Aris looked at the main screen at the arrogant profile of the Hegemony warship. "We're sending them a bill." He continued. "Lyra, compile a full tactical ledger of this engagement. Every decoy launched, every watt of energy used for the Ghost Fleet, every microsecond of their sensor data we exploited. Package it with a complete profile of their doctrinal response. Show them exactly how their own rigidity was used to defeat them." A low hum emanated from the deck as the ship's systems processed the immense data request. "The truth will be their punishment." Lyra's form shimmered. "Ledger compiled and packaged, Admiral. It includes a predictive model of how this exact strategy will be used against them in the next 10,000 simulated engagements, with a 97% failure rate for their doctrine." The countdown timer, now irrelevant for the convoy, still pulsed in the corner of the screen, 1 hour 58 minutes. It had become a clock measuring their own folly. "Send it," Aris commanded, and append a message. "Sign it, the auditors." The data stream shot across the void, a silent, invisible spear of pure information aimed at the heart of the Krathen command structure. For a long moment, nothing happened. The Krathen fleet continued to hold its position, basking in the glow of its phantom victory. Then the flagship's energy signature fluctuated wildly. They were reading the report. A civilian vignette flickered on the side screen. A medic aboard the Stardust Drifter was treating a crewman for a minor plasma burn, a consequence of pushing their engines to the absolute limit during the breakout. The cost of this victory was not zero, merely low. The medic applied a biofoam patch, and the crewman gave a weary thumbs up. The price of freedom was always paid in some coin. "We anchor the line with our own resolve," Admiral Rostova said, her voice a mixture of awe and concern. "The Krathen fleet, they're talking to each other. On all channels. It's chaos." Lyra helpfully translated the torrent of alien chatter. Accusations, denials, raw fury. The neatly packaged report had detonated inside their command structure like a logic bomb. The truth of their defeat, laid bare in undeniable metrics, was indigestible to their doctrine of infallibility. Their system was crashing. Aris watched his expression unreadable. He had not fired a single shot, not destroyed a single ship. He had held up a mirror, and they had shattered themselves against their own reflection. The Krathen flagship suddenly vented plasma, a purely theatrical gesture of rage. It was the tantrum of a bully who had just been laughed at in the town square. "The convoy has cleared the jump point," Admiral Jian confirmed. "They're safe." A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the bridge. The immediate crisis was over, but the larger confrontation had just begun. The Krathan fleet was now a wounded, enraged animal, their doctrine forcing them to lash out, to find a target to salvage their wounded pride. And the only target left was Aris's small fleet. They were about to learn the real cost of their ultimatum. "All ships brace for impact," Aris said, his voice calm. "Deploy the full mirror lattice. Not for deception this time, for defense." The crystalline arrays unfolded completely, forming a glittering, semi-transparent barrier in front of the human ships. The console next to him gave off a low hum, its internal fans working to cool the overloaded processors. Lyra slaved their targeting computers to the lattice. "I want every incoming energy weapon blast sent right back where it came from." The Krathan fleet, in its rage, fired. A wave of incandescent energy enough to boil a planet's oceans surged across the void. It was a pure doctrinal response when confused or challenged apply overwhelming force. The energy hit the mirror lattice not as a solid wall, but as a complex, multi-layered crystal. The light bent fractured and was perfectly, flawlessly redirected. The ledger is balanced in fire. The Krathan fleet was hit by its own volley. Shields flared and overloaded. Hulls glowed cherry red from the thermal shock. The lead cruiser, which had fired the most powerful beam, suffered a catastrophic overload in its primary energy conduits. It didn't explode, but its lights flickered and died, leaving it a dark, silent hulk. The cost of their anger was delivered instantly, with no forwarding address. Minor damage reported on the dauntless Rostova announced, her voice steady despite the incredible light show outside. A lattice projector overheated and shattered. Ensign Kova suffered a flash burn to his retina, but will recover. The system worked. The price was small, a handful of broken crystal, and a temporarily blinded officer, but it was a price nonetheless. It was entered into the ship's log, a small debit on a long account. A suit-bound maintenance crew's heartbeat throbbed faintly over the comms as they went to assess the damage. "The mirror demands its toll." The Krathan fleet reeled, stunned. Their own doctrine had been turned into a weapon against them, their own power used for their own punishment. The rage in their comms chatter was replaced by something new: fear. They had encountered an enemy who did not fight by their rules, who did not trade blows, but simply returned them. It was a form of combat so alien to their philosophy that they had no response. Admiral Lyra stated, her shimmering form unwavering. "The enemy fleet is breaking formation. They are not attacking. They appear to be confused." Aris allowed a thin smile. "Confusion is the first step toward education, Lyra." He had shown them the flaw in their logic, the weakness in their certainty. Now came the lesson. This was the hour of the teacher. Jian opened a fleet-wide channel to the Krathan, unencrypted. "I want every ship in their fleet to hear this." Aris stood, stepping down from the command throne to stand in the center of the bridge, his reflection now sharp and clear in the spotless deck. The low, steady vibration of the vigilance was a reassuring presence beneath his feet. He was the anchor, and the storm was breaking. The channel opened with a crackle of static. "This is Admiral Aris Thorne of the Alliance Fleet Vigilance." He began, his voice calm and clear, broadcast across the void. "You came here today to make a statement. You delivered an ultimatum threatening the lives of civilians to enforce your doctrine. That doctrine has now failed you. It has been weighed, measured, and found wanting." He held the silence for a moment, letting the words sink in. "You believed your power gave you the right to issue demands backed by death. We believe that true power is the restraint not to. We did not destroy your ships. You scarred them yourselves. We did not break your fleet. Your own doctrine did. The glare from a nearby console cast long shadows across his face. This is your lesson. Aris continued, his voice resonating with quiet authority. Your ultimatum doctrine is a liability. It creates predictable patterns that can be exploited. It substitutes strength for strategy and terror for respect. It has a cost, and today you have begun to pay it. He paused again. We have sent you the full accounting. Study it, learn from it, or the next lesson will be more severe. The books must be balanced. He turned to Gian. Close the channel. The Krathan fleet hung in disarray, a collection of powerful warships suddenly rendered impotent by a truth they could not refute. Their flagship, silent and dark, was a monument to their failure. The ultimatum timer on the main screen finally reached 0 and blinked out, its purpose rendered utterly moot. The confrontation was over, but the war of ideas had just begun. A mystery had been seeded. How would the small fleet survive? The reveal was the ghost fleet and the mirror lattice. The payoff was the Krathan's self-inflicted damage and doctrinal collapse. Aris watched the enemy fleet, their movements now hesitant and uncertain. They were like a predator that had suddenly forgotten how to hunt. They had been declawed by logic. The scales had tipped. Lyra, what are they doing now? Aris asked, his gaze still fixed on the enemy. They are retreating, Admiral, the fleet mind replied. In disarray. Multiple ships are broadcasting conflicting orders. Their command structure has fractured. The victory was more complete than Aris had dared to hope. He hadn't just saved the convoy. He had broken the philosophical spine of the enemy fleet. He returned to his command throne, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly beginning to fade, leaving a familiar weariness in its place. Commander Rostova set a course for Beacon 7. Let's go home. The bridge crew, for the first time in hours, allowed themselves a moment of release. A quiet cheer went through the room, quickly suppressed back into professional silence. The low hiss of the ventilation system seemed to welcome the change in mood. We hold the line so others can live in peace. But Aris knew this was just one battle. The Krathan hegemony was vast, its ultimatum doctrine deeply entrenched. This single fleet might have learned a lesson today, but the institution remained. The larger war was one of precedence, of establishing new rules of engagement in a galaxy that had for too long rewarded brutality. Today, a new precedent had been set. A precedent written in light and logic, not blood. Lyra, he said softly, so only the fleet mind could hear. Begin drafting a formal protest to the Galactic Concord. Cite the Krathan Ultimatum Doctrine as a violation of the Treaty of Sentient Dignity. Use today's ledger as Exhibit A. The light of the AI pulsed gently. It will be my pleasure, Admiral. I will also append a recommendation that the Mirror Lattice Defense System be made standard issue for all Alliance convoy escort fleets. The reckoning was not over. It was being formalized. The Vigilance turned its powerful engines, pushing it toward the distant star that marked the way home. The broken Krathan fleet was left behind, a scattered collection of chastened bullies in the cold, unforgiving dark. Aris leaned his head back against the command throne, the vibration of the deck, a steady, reassuring presence. They had faced the abyss and had not blinked. They had been given an ultimatum and had answered with a lesson. But a new mystery was already forming in his mind. The Krathan were not the only power in the galaxy that relied on such tactics. What would happen when they faced an enemy who was not so easily dissuaded by logic, an enemy who saw the mirror not as a teacher, but simply as a target to be shattered? The thought sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. Brace for the next storm. As the fleet prepared to enter hyperspace, a priority message alert flashed on Eris's console. It was from Alliance High Command. His brow furrowed as he read it. It seemed the Krathan hegemony was not taking their lesson gracefully. They were doubling down. They had declared the Alliance's actions an act of dishonorable psychic warfare, and had invoked a rarely used clause in the Galactic Accords, a formal binding challenge. Rostova. Bring us to a halt, Aris ordered, the weariness in his voice replaced by a new, harder edge. The ship's momentum bled away, its forward motion ceasing. The quiet hum of the bridge deepened as systems were brought back to full alert status. The scent of ozone returned sharper this time. "What is it, Admiral?" she asked, her hand hovering over the helm controls. "The hegemony has issued a trial by fire," Aris said, his voice grim. "They're escalating. They're choosing a neutral system and demanding a formal fleet engagement to settle this dishonor. Winners' doctrine is publicly vindicated. Losers is publicly censured, and their fleet commanders retired." He didn't need Lyra to tell him what retired meant in the Krathan vocabulary. The ultimatum had returned dressed in the robes of law. Lyra's form shimmered with what might have been agitation. "Admiral, this is a trap. The trial by fire is an archaic ritual, a brute force contest. It negates our strategic advantages. They will choose a system with no asteroids, no nebulae, nothing to hide behind. A flat, open arena where our mirror lattice is less effective against a multi-vector assault." The AI was right. It was a challenge designed to turn their greatest strength asymmetric strategy into a weakness. "They're trying to force us into a slugging match," Rostova concluded, her face set. "They know they have more ships, heavier guns. They want to trade blows until we're dust." She paused. "We can refuse. High Command will support us." Aris shook his head. "No. If we refuse, they'll paint us as cowards who won a single victory through tricks and deception. The galaxy will see their doctrine as strong and ours as weak. We can't win the peace by refusing the war. A count must be answered." A new plan began to form in Eris's mind, more dangerous and audacious than the first. The Krathan wanted a stage, a public spectacle to reclaim their honor. He would give them one. But the play performed on that stage would not be the one they were expecting. He would turn their arena into a classroom, their trial by fire into a final public examination of their bankrupt philosophy. Lyra Eris said, turning to the fleet mind, "What is the one thing the Krathan value more than victory?" The AI processed the query for a fraction of a second. Public perception of their martial superiority. Their entire social and political structure is built on the belief that their doctrine is not only effective, but divinely mandated. To be shown as strategically inferior is a fate worse than death. That was the key. Precisely, Aris agreed. "They've offered us a trial by fire. We will accept, but we will set our own terms of victory." He looked at his senior officers, their faces taut with anticipation. "We are not going there to destroy their fleet. We are going there to publicly dismantle their doctrine piece by piece in front of the entire galaxy." The heat from the tactical display felt like a furnace against his skin. "Gian, get me High Command. I have a message for the Krathan hegemony." He began to pace the bridge, his mind racing through the calculations, the risks, the possible outcomes. This was no longer about a single convoy. It was about challenging a galactic paradigm. It was about proving that mercy and strength were not mutually exclusive. It was time to rewrite the rules of war. The Krathan chose the tier system, a desolate expanse of empty space with a single dying star. It was, as Lyra had predicted, a perfect arena for a battle of brute force. No cover, no concealment, no strategic terrain to exploit. The Alliance fleet arrived to find the Krathan armada already there, arrayed in a massive, intimidating wall of gunmetal gray. They were broadcasting their readiness on all public channels, a clear act of posturing for the dozens of neutral observers who had gathered at the edge of the system to watch the trial. A low-frequency vibration from the engines was the only sound. A civilian vignette from an observer ship showed two alien journalists discussing the odds. "The Alliance fleet is outnumbered 3-1, said one, a tall insectoid being. Their commander is either a genius or a fool. The other, a being of pure energy contained in a shimmering field, replied, 'We are about to find out which.' The hegemony is broadcasting the challenge terms now. The galaxy was watching. The Krathan admiral, a hulking, armor-clad warrior named Vorlog, appeared on Eris's main screen. His face was a mask of ritual scars and arrogant certainty. Admiral Thorn Vorlog boomed, his voice dripping with contempt. "You have accepted our trial by fire. Your tricks and illusions will not avail you here. This is a contest of strength and will a test of pure doctrine. We will annihilate your fleet and your philosophy along with it." Aris met his gaze without flinching. "Admiral Vorlog, we accept your challenge, but we propose a modification to the terms of victory." A murmur went through the Krathan bridge visible behind Vorlog. "There will be no modifications," Vorlog snarled. "Victory is the total destruction of the opposing fleet." "The old ways died hard." "We disagree," Aris countered calmly. "Total destruction is a failure of imagination. We define victory differently. We will prove our doctrine superior not by destroying you, but by systematically disarming you ship by ship without a single casualty on your side. We will render your entire fleet inert, a collection of helpless targets, and we will do it while preserving the lives of every soul aboard." A stunned silence fell over both bridges. Vorlog stared, then threw his head back and laughed a harsh, grating sound. "An amusing jest. You will disarm us with what harsh language?" He leaned forward, his eyes burning with fury. "Your arrogance is breathtaking. We reject your pathetic terms. We will grind you to atoms, the transmission cut out." A sickle of doubt had been planted. "He is rattled," Lyra observed. "The proposal is illogical to him. It does not compute within his doctrinal framework. He is forced to appear strong by rejecting it, but the observers have heard our terms. The moral high ground is now ours." The console next to Eris hummed, its internal fans spinning faster. The air on the bridge was thick with tension. "It's more than that," Lyra Aris said. "We've just turned their trial into a test they don't know how to pass. If they destroy us, they've simply proven they can kill a smaller, weaker opponent who offered them mercy. It's a hollow victory. But if we succeed in our goal, we humiliate them on a galactic scale." He had turned their arena not into a classroom, but into a public vivisection. The scalpel was sharp. "Admiral, the Krathan fleet is advancing." Rostova reported, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. "All ships full combat readiness. Deploy the lattice. This time we're not just reflecting. We're going to be surgical." The fleet moved into a defensive posture, the crystalline mirrors unfolding like the petals of a deadly flower. The plan was simple in concept, but fiendishly complex in execution. They would use the mirror lattice not just to return fire, but to dissect it. Lyra would calculate the exact trajectory and frequency of every incoming weapon blast. Instead of sending the full beam back at the firing ship, they would fracture it, redirecting small, precise slivers of that energy at specific, non-critical external systems on other ships. Weapon emitters, sensor arrays, engine cowlings. They would use the Krathan's own power to methodically defang them. It was an audit written in plasma. The first volley from the Crathen was a terrifying display of raw power. A storm of coherent light and plasma bolts converged on the Alliance fleet. The mirror lattice lit up, glowing with absorbed energy. For a heart-stopping moment, the system strained under the load. A stress fracture appeared on the main display, crawling across the icon for the Vigilance's primary mirror. The deck shuddered violently. Then the lattice responded, not with a single massive return volley, but with 1,000 tiny brilliant lances of light, each streaking toward a different target. The Crathen fleet, expecting a head-on blast, was completely unprepared. A cruiser on the left flank lost its primary turret, as a sliver of its neighbor's cannon blast neatly sliced it off. A destroyer's main sensor mast vaporized, blinded by a redirected beam from a ship 3 kilometers away. The enemy's strength was now a shared liability. Vorlog's voice roared over the open channel, now laced with genuine confusion. "What is this sorcery? Return fire. Concentrate on their lead ship." The Crathen gunners, disciplined and obedient, complied. The full force of their forward batteries now focused on the Vigilance. The strain on the ship's lattice became immense. The air on the bridge grew hot, and the lights flickered under the power drain. "Lattice integrity at 40%, Admiral Jian yelled over the cacophony. "We can't take another volley like that." A coolant line ruptured somewhere deep in the ship, venting a hiss of supercooled gas into the engineering bay. A minor cost, but the ledger was growing. "We won't have to," Aris said, his eyes locked on the tactical plot. Lyra now. This was the second part of the plan. The Crathen were predictable. Their doctrine demanded focus fire on the enemy command ship. They had gathered their power into a single focused point. He had counted on it. "Hold the line, then open the gate." Lyra's calm voice cut through the noise. "Executing rebound cascade." The Vigilance's mirror lattice did something impossible. Instead of returning the incoming energy, it absorbed it, and shunted it through a series of gravimetric conduits to the lattices of the other Alliance ships. For a split second, the entire Alliance fleet was linked one single integrated mirror. Then they fired it back, not as 1,000 tiny slivers, but as one colossal, perfectly focused beam of light. It was the combined energy of the entire Crathen volley, amplified and harmonized. It wasn't aimed at Vorlog's flagship to destroy it. It was aimed at the empty space directly in front of it. The mirror reflects the will behind the weapon. The beam hit the void and detonated not like a bomb, but like a star being born. The sheer electromagnetic pulse washed over the Crathen fleet. It did no physical damage. It was pure energy, a wave of information and power. But to the unshielded electronics and energy conduits of the Crathen ships, it was a death sentence. One by one, the lights on the Crathen warships went out. Their weapon systems overloaded and shut down. Their engines sputtered and died. Their command consoles went dark. The entire armada was rendered inert, silent, and powerless, drifting in the dying light of the Tyre sun. The only ship left with full power was Vorlog's flagship, which had been shielded by the blast itself. He was alone in a graveyard of his own making, surrounded by the silent ghosts of his own fleet. A perfect, deafening silence. The bridge of the Vigilance was still the crew staring in disbelief at the main screen. They had done it. They had won the trial by fire without destroying a single ship. The only sounds were the faint hum of the life support and the soft chime of a dozen system alerts as engineers began assessing their own minor damages. On the main screen, Vorlog's face was a ruin. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound, soul-shattering humiliation. He had brought a hammer to a battle of wits and had only succeeded in smashing his own hand. His doctrine, his honor, his entire worldview had been dismantled in front of the galaxy. The ledger was closed, and the balance was devastating. Eris opened a channel, his voice soft, but carrying the weight of finality. Admiral Vorlog, the trial is over. Your fleet is disabled, but your crews are alive. We claim victory under our proposed terms. Acknowledge. Vorlog stared, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The reflection of his dead bridge was visible in his polished armor. He had been so focused on the enemy in front of him, he never realized the true trap was the one he had laid for himself. Finally, he slumped in his command chair, a broken warrior. I acknowledge. The words were a whisper, but they were broadcast to the entire system, to every observer, to every ship in his silent, helpless fleet. It was the sound of a doctrine dying. The account was settled. On a nearby observer ship, the two journalists were speechless. The insectoid finally managed to speak. He is not a fool. He is not a genius. He is a teacher. The energy being shimmered in agreement. And he has just given the galaxy a lesson it will not soon forget. A new precedent had not just been set. It had been carved into the galactic record for all to see. The public tally of the trial confirmed the Alliance victory, the terms displayed for all. Aris watched the defeated Krathan admiral for a moment longer, then cut the feed. He felt no triumph, only a deep, profound sense of relief. He had held to his principles, had refused to become the monster he fought. He had shown that there was another way, a better way. The cost had been a few strained systems, a handful of minor injuries, and a dangerous gamble with the lives of his crew. A cost he had been willing to pay. We are anchored by the mercy we show. The offer of aid was met with sullen silence. Aris had broadcasted on all channels, offering Alliance engineering crews and medical teams to help the Krathan restart their dead ships. It was a gesture of goodwill, a final practical lesson in the doctrine of mercy. For hours, there was no response, only the slow, silent drift of a disabled armada. The Vigilance and her fleet stood by a quiet sentinel in the face of profound defeat. A low, steady vibration from the ship's gravimetric plates was the only proof they were not a statue. They are refusing assistance. Admiral Lyra reported, her light form pulsing with a neutral rhythm. 80% of the fleet is now reporting minimal system power, but they are using it to enforce internal comms silence. They are isolating themselves. Aris nodded, a familiar ache settling behind his eyes. He had hoped for a crack in their monolithic pride, a moment of connection in the shared vulnerability of the void. He was disappointed, but not surprised. Rostova stood beside his throne, her arms crossed. They'd rather choke on their own fumes than accept a helping hand. Pride is a hard thing to kill, sir. The air on the bridge, once thick with the scent of ozone and hot metal, now smelled sterile and calm, the aftermath of a storm. Pride is their doctrine's last line of defense, Aris replied. If they accept our help, they accept our philosophy, and they are not ready for that. They had broken the fleet, but not the faith. Then something changed. A single Krathan ship, a mid-sized cruiser named the Iron Will, broke the silence. Its transmission was not for Aris, but for Vorlog's flagship. Lyra flagged it, instantly decrypting and translating it on the main screen. It was a declaration from the ship's captain, a man named Jorik. He accused Vorlog of cowardice, of dishonor, of failing the hegemony by acknowledging Thorn's perverted terms of victory. Vorlog brought dishonor by accepting the trial. The message raged. True strength is not measured in survival, but in righteous destruction. We will show you the cost of weakness. Before anyone on the Vigilance could react, the Iron Will's core went critical. It did not explode in a chaotic fireball. The Krathan were too disciplined for that. It imploded, a violent, self-consuming flash of white light that left behind nothing but shimmering radiation and a rapidly expanding cloud of vaporized metal. One ship became a statement. A shocked silence fell upon the bridge. The crew stared at the empty space where a warship had been moments before. This was not the act of a defeated enemy. It was the act of a zealot, a martyr. And martyrdom was a dangerous idea to introduce into a broken ideology. Lyra Aris said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What was the casualty count on that ship?" "Approximately 2,000 souls, Admiral," the AI replied. "The act was intentional. I detect no automated distress signals." They embraced their end. The low hum of the bridge electronics suddenly felt like a funeral dirge. Aris had won a victory, with no enemy casualties, and in response, the enemy had begun killing themselves, reframing their defeat as a noble sacrifice. The ledger was being written in blood, but not by his hand. This act of self-destruction broke the spell. The remaining Crathan ships began accepting basic power assistance not out of gratitude, but out of a clear, overriding order from Vorlog's flagship. They were not engaging, merely surviving. They were a fleet of ghosts. Their pride shattered their doctrine in ruins, and a new, more malignant ideology beginning to bloom in the cracks. Aris watched them, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He had not ended a threat. He had merely changed its shape. News of the trial by fire and the subsequent suicide of the Iron Will spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. The Alliance celebrated a bloodless victory, hailing Aris as a hero of the new age. But Aris saw the darker truth. He saw the birth of a martyr's cult within the Crathan hegemony, a faction that would twist his act of mercy into a tale of psychic violation and dishonor. A sickness was growing in the dark. His fears were confirmed a week later. Alliance intelligence reports compiled by Lyra from 1,000 different sources painted a grim picture. The Crathan hegemony was in turmoil. Vorlog had been quietly retired, but the hardliners, led by a shadowy figurehead known only as the First Zealot, were gaining power. They preached a new doctrine, not of rigid ultimatums, but of absolute nihilistic vengeance. They argued that the Alliance's mercy was a weapon more insidious than any cannon, a tool to poison the Crathan spirit. "Their propaganda is effective," Lyra stated, displaying a translated transcript of a Zealot broadcast. The language was inflammatory, filled with words like soul theft and mind plague. "They are reframing the trial by fire as a spiritual defeat, not a strategic one. They claim you did not disable their ships, but unmanned their warriors, stealing their will to fight. It is a narrative designed to incite irrational hatred." The truth had been twisted into a pretext for atrocity. They're not just trying to claim their honor. Rostova observed, reading the report over Aris's shoulder. They're preparing for a holy war. The deck plates beneath their feet gave a slight shudder as the Vigilance completed its resupply at Beacon 7. The quiet normality of the starbase felt a universe away from the ideological poison spreading through the hegemony. Aris knew what was coming. The Zealots would not challenge him to another formal trial. They would not meet him in open battle. They would seek a target that maximized civilian suffering, a target designed to prove that the Alliance's mercy was a fatal weakness. They would create a scenario where Aris would be forced to choose between his principles and the lives of innocents, a stage where any action he took would be portrayed as a monstrous failure. They would build a trap from his own virtues. The target was the Coriolis Citadel, a massive independent orbital habitat in the neutral Nexus system. With a population of over 3 million souls, it was a bustling hub of trade and culture, a symbol of galactic cooperation. It was also, as Lyra's calculations grimly confirmed, strategically indefensible without incurring massive collateral damage. It was the perfect hostage. The Zealots didn't arrive with an armada. They arrived with a single heavily modified cruiser, the sister ship of the Iron Will, now christened the Martyr's Blade. It docked at the Citadel under a false registry, and within hours its commando teams had seized control of the station's central command and reactor core. Their message to the galaxy was not an ultimatum, it was a declaration. A new face appeared on Eris's screen. This was the first Zealot, a Krathan named Kieris, his face unmarked by ritual scars, but burning with a cold, terrifying fire. Admiral Thorn, he began, his voice devoid of Vorlog's bluster, replaced by a chilling certainty. We are not here to issue demands. We are here to conduct a final lesson. He spoke like a judge pronouncing a sentence. The Coriolis Citadel is now our instrument. Kieris continued a live feed of the station's terrified population, visible behind him. Its primary fusion reactor has been linked to a dead man switch. Not our switch, Admiral. Yours. We have slaved its containment system to the energy output of your fleet. If you fire your weapons, the magnetic bottle will collapse. If you deploy your mirror lattice, the ambient energy will overload the safeties. If you attempt to withdraw, a timer begins, and we will begin executing 1,000 civilians every hour. Your move, teacher. The transmission ended. The bridge of the Vigilance was utterly silent. The trap was perfect. It was a tactical labyrinth with no exit. Every tool at Eris's disposal, his weapons, his lattice, even his ability to retreat, was now a trigger for a catastrophe. Kieris had turned the entire station into a bomb and handed Eris the detonator. The cost of engagement was genocide. The cost of inaction was also genocide. All options lead to mass casualties. Admiral Lyra stated, her voice for the first time, edged with something that sounded like digital despair. My calculations show no strategic pathway to victory. The Zealot has created a perfect ethical paradox. To save the station, we must not act. To not act is to let them be slaughtered. The cold glare of the tactical display reflected the grim faces of the crew. Before the main set piece, a civilian vignette played out on an intercepted internal comms feed from the Citadel. A teacher was trying to keep a classroom of young children calm, leading them in a simple song about the stars. Their small, innocent voices were a stark, heartbreaking counterpoint to the cold calculus of the crisis. The stakes were 3 million songs waiting to be silenced. The innocent were the battlefield. Rostova's knuckles were white. We could try a covert insertion. Special forces. It's a long shot. A 1 in a million shot, Jian Li countered, his voice strained. They'll have the command center locked down. We'd never get to the reactor controls in time. The arguments were futile. And they all knew it. The problem wasn't tactical. It was philosophical. Kieris didn't want to win a fight. He wanted to force Eris to murder 3 million people to prove a point. Aris stood, his face a mask of stone. He walked to the main holotank, staring at the pristine image of the Coriolis Citadel, a jewel hanging in the void. He had taught the Krathan a lesson about the weakness of their doctrine. Now Kieris was teaching him a lesson about the price of mercy. He was being shown the dark reflection of his own strategy, a weapon that turned an enemy's morality against them. The mirror now showed a monster. He wants to make me a butcher to prove to the galaxy that our creed is a lie, a luxury that shatters at the first touch of real evil, Aris said softly. He believes he has left me no choice but to become him. He looked at his crew, at their faces, etched with fear and uncertainty. He saw the trust they placed in him, the belief that he would find a way. Lyra, he said, his voice regaining its familiar tone of command. You said all strategic pathways lead to disaster. I want you to start thinking outside of strategy. Kiris has built a cage of logic and consequence. We are not going to try and buy and we are going to convince the zookeeper to open the door. The AI's light flickered. I do not understand the metaphor, Admiral. We must change the nature of the game itself. He has given us a set of rules in a game we cannot win, Aris explained. So we will play a different game. Not against Kiris, against the Krathan people. He turned to Jian. Get me a direct, unblockable channel to the Krathan homeworld. Every civilian comms channel, every public broadcast system. We are going to stage a trial of our own. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. They would not attack the Martyr's Blade. They would not try to storm the station. They would put Kiris and his new doctrine on trial in the court of his own people's opinion. It was a gamble that the average Krathan citizen warrior born, but not necessarily suicidal, still possessed a core of honor that Kiris's nihilism had betrayed. Anchor, the soul, and the body will follow. Lyra, you will be our prosecutor, Aris commanded. Compile every piece of data from the first encounter. The ultimatum, our response. The trial by fire, our offer of aid. The suicide of the Iron Will. Contrast it with Kiris's actions here. Show the shift from a doctrine of strength, however misguided, to a doctrine of cowardly hostage-taking. A low hum filled the bridge as the fleet mind began her work processing petabytes of data into a coherent, devastating narrative. Rostova Aris continued. We are going to give the Citadel a shield, not a mirror lattice, a real one. Rostova stared. Sir, the energy spike will be immense, Aris finished, but it will not come from us. He pointed to the system's primary star. It will come from the sun. This was the third most dangerous part of the plan. A solar tap. Using a focused gravimetric beam, they would pull a colossal filament of plasma from the star itself and wrap it around the station like a cocoon. It was an untested, incredibly dangerous maneuver. The plasma shield would be unstable. It would block the zealots from escaping and prevent them from firing on Aris's fleet. But it would also bathe the station in terrifying levels of heat and radiation. The station's own shields would be pushed to their absolute limit. It was a race against time. They had to break Kiris's will before the very shield meant to protect the Citadel cooked it from the inside out. The cure was also a poison. It is theoretically possible. Admiral Lyra confirmed, her light flickering rapidly as she ran the simulations. But the margin for error is less than 0.1%. A single miscalculation in the gravimetric field could unleash a coronal mass ejection that would sterilize the entire system. The faint hiss of the ship's ventilation system seemed to whisper a warning against such hubris. We have no other choice, Aris said, his decision made. We cannot play his game. We will create our own board. He looked at his crew, their expressions a mix of terror and resolute determination. He has given the people of that station a death sentence. We will give them a chance at life, however slim. Brace for the fire. As the fleet moved into position to perform the solar tap, Aris opened his broadcast to the Krathan homeworld. His face appeared on a billion screens, calm and resolute. People of the hegemony, he began. I am Admiral Aris Thorn. We have met before. I am not your enemy, but a sickness has taken root in your ranks. A warrior named Kiris has taken 3 million innocent souls hostage, and he has done so in your name. He yielded the floor to Lyra. The AI, manifesting as a simple, elegant sphere of white light, began her presentation. She laid out the facts one by one with cold, irrefutable logic. She showed the recordings of the ultimatum, the flawless victory of the trial by fire, the offer of aid. Then she showed Kyrus's broadcast the terrified faces of the civilians on the citadel. She showed the tactical reality, a trap from which there was no honorable escape. The evidence was a hammer blow to their pride. The doctrine of the ultimatum was flawed, but it was based on a principle of strength. Lyra's synthesized voice explained, echoing across a world of warriors. The doctrine of the zealot is based on a principle of terror. It does not seek victory. It seeks to force your enemy to commit your atrocities for you. It is the philosophy of a coward. As the broadcast continued, the Vigilance and her fleet began the solar tap. A thin, impossibly bright tendril of star stuff reached out from the sun, guided by the combined gravimetric power of the Alliance ships. It snaked across millions of kilometers of space, a river of fusion fire, and began to wrap itself around the Coriolis citadel. The station's own shields flared violently as they struggled to cope with the sudden intense heat. A deep, system-wide vibration was felt on the deck of the Vigilance. A cost was being paid in energy, in risk, in the scorching of the Citadel's outer hull. On the station, Kyrus watched in disbelief. He was trapped. He could not escape, and he could not trigger the station's destruction without being consumed by the very fire he had sought to control. Aris had not just refused to play his game. He had flipped the entire table, trapping Kyrus inside his own atrocity. He had built a cage, and now he was in it. Your warrior Kyrus is now shielded. Lyra's broadcast continued, showing the Krathan people the live feed of the solar cocoon. Shielded by the heart of Sotartar, Mafsu of a star. He is safe from us. But the 3 million civilians with him are not. The station cannot withstand this heat for long. Kyrus can end this at any moment. He can surrender the station and save his hostages, or he can allow them all to burn a final monument to his honor. The choice was no longer Aris's. It was Kyrus's. And the entire Krathan homeworld was watching him make it. The mystery was no longer how Aris would save the station. It was whether the Krathan people would allow one of their own to commit such a monstrous act of passive murder. The reveal was the plasma shield. The payoff was the transfer of moral responsibility. The ledger was now in their hands. The comms channels on the Krathan homeworld exploded. There was outrage, denial, but beneath it all, a current of deep, profound shame. Lyra's logic was inescapable. They were a warrior race that valued strength and honor, and they were witnessing a Krathan holding a position that could only be maintained by cowardice. He wasn't fighting. He was waiting for a star to kill women and children for him. Admiral Rostova reported, her voice tense. The Citadel's shield integrity is down to 20%. Hull temperature is critical. We can't hold this plasma filament for much longer. The glare from the main screen showing the incandescently glowing station was almost too bright to look at. The heat shimmer was visible even across the void. Hold the line, Commander Aris ordered, his eyes fixed on the comms chatter from the homeworld. He was watching for a single sign. A single voice of reason to rise from the noise. And then it came. A broadcast from the Krathan High Council itself, overriding all other channels. An old grizzled warrior appeared on screen, his face a roadmap of ancient battle scars. It was Grand Marshal Kalen, a legendary figure thought long retired. Kyrus of the Martyr's Blade, the old warrior's voice boomed, filled with a gravelly authority that cut through the chaos. You have disgraced the name of the hegemony. You fight with the weapons of the weak, fear and deceit. You have abandoned the path of the warrior for the path of the fiend. This is not our way. The old guard was rising to defend its soul. Kalen paused, his gaze seeming to pierce the screen. Surrender now. Surrender and face the justice of your own people. If you do not, then you are no longer Crathen. You are a ghost, and you will be forgotten. The message was clear. Kyrus had lost his people. His support had evaporated. He was no longer a zealot or a martyr. He was just a man in a box about to be consumed by fire. On the martyr's blade, Kyrus watched his dream of a vengeful, purified hegemony die. He had been outmaneuvered, his philosophy exposed as a hollow shell. With a final choked cry of rage, he deactivated the dead man switch and surrendered the station. The teacher had taught the entire species to look in the mirror. "He's done it, sir," Jian said, his voice filled with exhausted relief. "He's standing down." Aris gave a single sharp nod. "Release the filament." Gently. The tendril of plasma disconnected from the citadel and recoiled back into the sun, its light fading like a dying ember. The Coriolis citadel, scorched and battered but miraculously intact, floated in the silent dark. Its lights, which had dimmed under the strain, flickered back to their full, hopeful brilliance. The cost of this victory was high. The citadel had suffered severe external damage. Hundreds of its inhabitants were treated for radiation exposure and heat shock. The Alliance fleet had pushed its gravimetric projectors to the breaking point, requiring a month of repairs. It was a victory measured in survival, but etched with the scars of a near apocalypse. The price for peace is paid on the anvil of crisis. In the aftermath, the institutional consequences were swift and decisive. Under the guidance of Grand Marshal Kalen, the Crathen hegemony formally and publicly outlawed the Ultimatum doctrine and the Zealots' creed that had followed. The treaty, broadcast live from the Coriolis citadel, was entered into the Galactic Concord's public ledger, a permanent record of a failed philosophy. The precedent was locked. Mercy was not weakness. It was the foundation of a strength that could move stars. Eris stood on the bridge of the Vigilance as it prepared to leave the Nexus system. His work was done. He had faced down two doctrines of hate, not with overwhelming force, but with an unyielding belief in a better way. He had held a mirror up to his enemies and trusted that in the end they would not be able to stomach their own reflection. He had gambled on the soul of a species, and he had won. His gaze fell upon a side screen where the tally from the Galactic ledger was being confirmed by a news anchor. The cool, pewter glow of the console reflected in his weary eyes. The ship was quiet now, the only sensory anchor the faint rhythmic pulse of the recycled air, a steady heartbeat for the hundreds of souls aboard. He had held the line when it seemed impossible. He had answered ultimatums with lessons and rage with reason. They had tested his resolve, his morality, his very definition of victory, but he had never wavered. Power, he knew, was not the ability to destroy. It was the wisdom to build, the courage to shield, and the patience to teach. It was the quiet, unshakable faith that even in the deepest darkness, a single reflected light could show the way home. The universe does not reward cruelty. It merely bills for it.